Who is someone alive today who will be remembered in 500 years? 500 years ago we didn't have film, surely because now we do. Many more famous people will be remembered or revered for much longer than people of the past. Cult classics will have to live on, even if it's just to study them. It'll actually be amazing for people to study us, and they'll know so much more about how we lived through TV and movies. Life will be so different in 2500 that it will be fascinating for people to watch back. On the flip side, there are also just a lot more people today than there was 500 years ago, so the playing field is just so crowded. How can anyone make as much of a mark anymore if the population keeps exploding and globalization asks an individual to keep track of happenings all around the world, all at a more frenetic next big thing pace? Inventions too. With technology being invented so rapidly, what even makes a famous inventor? We don't get a new groundbreaking zeitgeist invention every decade anymore, but instead so many new inventions every year that invention is hardly even noteworthy. And is it really a person these days that is famous for inventing, or a corporation or investing group that takes the fame? And with the rise of super-subjective entertainment markets, are there many universal artists or writers people can turn to in the same way people could turn to the thing of 500 years ago? We don't even watch the same TV shows as our neighbors, so what would have a higher chance universal fame for 500 years down the road more so than a classic show an entire nation watched like I Love Lucy? Our truly universal works are things like Avengers, which are essentially disposable entertainment meant to be forgotten and replaced on a 4-year cycle. Part of me wonders if the creation of new near-eternal historically ubiquitous figures might be coming to an end, minus the odd truly spectacular or disastrous event. We might get a Martian Neil Armstrong, but do we think Neil Armstrong will be famous in 500 years in the way Columbus is? And yes, Columbus probably should be forgotten as a household name or extremely re-examined. I just meant it as an example for the current-day ubiquitously famous people. And even that re-examination might be a 500-plus years from today point of interest. I'm not sure if this will make a difference. Physical film rots and will be lost, but digitized pictures and videos are at a huge risk of being lost as well. As technology becomes obsolete, data that is stored on outdated formats is lost. For example, if you store something on a floppy disk in 1997 and never transferred it onto anything else, that data is lost forever because there's no longer anything capable of reading that floppy disk. This will continue to happen. Eventually, the internet will become outdated, obsolete, and inaccessible, meaning you'll never be able to see anything on the internet again. Of course, some things will be transferred from platform to platform because of preserved importance, but when does that fall by the wayside? Sometimes things from 25 years ago don't seem important so no one saves anything about them, but 500 years from now that an important event from 25 years ago seems way more important, but little info is available. I like your optimism, but as an archivist I can promise you that won't be the case. In short, because entropy, all forms of information storing media are constantly breaking down, and people are really bad at keeping important things in a safe and secure environment for any prolonged period of time. I could write you a book about how bad books are at surviving time. I could make you a documentary about all of the films lost to time. Things don't last, regardless of format. Emails get deleted, letters burned or thrown out, books rot and get eaten by bugs, stone tablets weather, woven beads fall apart, etc. Film degrades. Any information stored on a magnetic tape has a finite lifespan, and oil reactions stored on cellulose-based films will turn to literal dust. CDs decay just the same. Hard drives are being zapped by the sun even being stored inside your basement. USB drives too. Web-hosted media builds file errors and servers get corrupted, etc. Film is more temporal than physical mediums. Most early films of the silent era are gone, because when talkies came around people didn't copy them over into new reels. They just produced new films and the old ones had a tendency to explode. It is common practice in museums and archives now to copy the information and destroy nitrocellulose-based reels as a result. Now any film that is old and rediscovered gets entered into THR Library of Congress by default because they're so rare. Early photographic discs and vinyl records degrade. The oil-based record will decay if not properly destroyed. And a vast majority of music recorded on film was never copied over to cassettes, just as most cassettes recorded albums weren't copied to CD. And now we have massive gaps in the timeline of modern music. When you browse YouTube or Spotify for old music, you're only getting a fraction of the stuff that was ever recorded or produced in album format. Books are even worse. Since Rome became Christian all the way up to the 21st century, books were the biggest media format THST we used to record and store information, and yet we only have a fraction of books from anything pre-20th century, for a number of reasons, mostly relating to how people treated books during the production process of new books, and a bunch of wars. Modernity is a terrible agent of degradation. We treat old stuff as obsolete and neglect our informational resources in favor of new stuff. Before we had books, we used scrolls, and people would copy the scroll into a book and then throw out the scroll. Then when they wanted to make a new copy of the book, they would copy it and either throw out the original or toss the original on a bookshelf and leave it to rot while the new one was used to reference. When the early modern period was ending, we discovered old books are good for musket charges, and literally ransacked churches to rob them of all their metal and to cut up all the books and cut them into strips. Whatever books survived got turned into lampshades and book liners in the 20th century. Anything THST survived that got thrown into archives or museums or private collections because we realized we had destroyed an incredibly rare resource. THST event is literally the driving force that led to the creation of archival science. You might think this sounds like nonsense and that we have tons of records and information from the past that survives, and is available online, but what you have seen or have access to is a tiny sliver of everything THST was produced and only survives because some random copy of a copy of a copy happened to be rescued by a book collector or was found deep inside a cathedral. Physical mediums degrade. Most were never copied to newer media formats, and we often place too much emphasis onto newer mediums before we can ever test their longevity. As an example, film sucks for its permanency, but digital is even worse. Google JPEG rot, and then consider that in the 2000s most people completely abandoned film for a medium that has an archival lifespan of 5 years on average. Even lossless formats accumulate errors. Every time you touch a file, copy it, cut and paste it, or attach it to an email or upload it to a server, every time you interact with it, you slightly degrade THST file. We naively believe that these things are permanent, or that if it's online it will last forever, but no one takes the time to track down which specific server their files are stored in, or makes archival copies on physical formats in tandem with their digitized versions, or worries about recopying hard drives every 5 years to maintain file integrity, or the fact that even in the copying process you are slowly degrading the file. So maybe if someone is important enough to be memorialized in a number of contemporaneous files and records they will be remembered, but for most people and most works you will be swallowed by time just the same. Oh. Not too likely. Have you ever read through all the discussions on Usenet from back in the 80s and 90s, even browsed through them? All the people on the internet then were academics, students, and some few others at large corporations. Very little noise, lots of signal. That was only 25 or so years ago. It was all recorded digitally, and the number of copies of it are shrinking. Maybe someone will have a copy in 50 years. Or maybe everyone who said anything online back then will just be forgotten. You'd have to think about who we remember from 500 years ago. For example, from 1500s I'd say Shakespeare, Galileo or Mary Queen of Scots. So, considering that, great authors, inventors and presidents, kings or queens, soon maybe Haruki Murakami, Bob Dylan, Paul McCartney, Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and then probably the Queen, Obama and Nelson Mandela. Edit, forgot Steve Jobs and Mandela are dead. Oops. McCartney was going to be my reply as well. Not only is he a key member of the most popular, influential band of all time, who pushed the whole medium of recorded music forward, but as an individual he is the most successful composer, songwriter of all time. His multi-instrumental skills, songwriting, creativity, arrangement, production and musicianship are top-notch, and he's able to write compelling songs in a mind-blowing range of styles and genre. https://m.youtube.com/watch V equals 35 and 4 GPU 9 E and T equals 1 S. Here is a short YouTube clip of Bob Dylan talking about how he's in awe of McCartney, and how he makes it all seem so effortless. As a musician, I can attest to the fact that many contemporary musicians and songwriters refer to him as the master. I don't think we'll see the likes of his talent for a long time, if ever. Melodies that the whole world remembers and loves to sing along to over 50 years later, regardless of their native language. The Mozart of our day, except we never got to hear any recordings of Mozart singing, and I doubt he had the kind of powerhouse range and chameleonic vocal abilities of Mika. This is the only answer I've seen so far that I genuinely agree with. Mathematicians, physicists, scientists, etc. that champion significant results and whose names are carved into terms and concepts within their fields forever are the ones whose names will be studied even 500 years from now, unless a field completely dies out. These are the people that nobody, outside of professionals in the field, knows about today. But do you really think the general public knew who Newton or Galileo or Copernicus were during their lifetimes? Also, personal opinion, I don't think Hawking will be remembered 500 years from now by anybody but people working in the physics of black holes, or I suppose I'll be generous and extend it to quantum gravity as a whole. The problem is, in 500 years these fields will be expanded so much that these individual names will become further and fewer. So you really have to be of legendary status and the significance of your work, and frankly, I don't believe Hawking did as much as some of the greatest physicists alive even today. Physicists like Leonard Susskind, Witten, Penrose, Debatable, and Weinberg, I'm going to count him because he literally just passed away a month ago, are the ones whose names have been attached to a wide variety of fields within theoretical physics or physics as a whole, and will probably be known as fathers of a certain subfield they helped create or inspired. Additionally, mathematicians like Wiles, Terence Tao, Perlman, etc. will have their names attached to proofs or entire fields of mathematics in the future. We aren't going to stop studying math or physics. There were a whole bunch of staggeringly productive writers during the Renaissance that were adored by their contemporaries, people whose works were converted into plays, inspired poetry and song, and today nobody remembers them except specialist historians. History is fickle, and I don't think Stephen King stands out enough to be remembered 500 years from now, when society, tastes and the way we experience entertainment will have changed. Sir Tim Berners-Lee invented the internet. For those that don't know, pretty sure whatever it evolves into from now he'll still be heralded as the godfather of it, like Bell with the phone, etc. Editing for the pendants. Technically he invented the World Wide Web, not the internet, but we all got the point. He basically created the interface that allowed access to the internet for the masses in a meaningful way. Without him we wouldn't have what we have today. He received a 2016 Turing Award for inventing the World Wide Web, the first web browser, and the fundamental protocols and algorithms allowing the web to scale. He was named in Time magazine's list of the 100 most important people of the 20th century. For more, check out this wiki article. https://n.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/Tim_Berners-Lee. I'm not just trying to shit talk, but I genuinely don't think Richards will be remembered as widely as McCartney. Substantially fewer iconic songs, less innovation, influence, compositional, musical sophistication, and variety. I mean, sometimes even a one-hit wonder stands the test of time. Like Pachelbel was one and done after his canon, and the Stones are more than a one-hit wonder. I also think Jagger is a partment to be remembered more than Richards, but perhaps who sung what versus who played what will be secondary to who wrote what 500 years from now, if future covers of the songs displace original recordings. I think hundreds from years now, having the best stories might be more relevant to a place in the cultural memory than having the best music. Keith Richards has lots of interesting stories that might be appealing and retold long after death. People will compare him to whatever the 26th century equivalent of a rock star will be when they do a retrospective of 20th century music. Just think about classical musicians people still remember. Obviously Mozart is a great musician, but I think a large part of his continued popularity has to do with his larger-than-life personality and his interesting life. The fact he had a great biopic, even if it's not all that accurate, also contributed a lot to how people now remember him. Beethoven similarly has a great story. A deaf composer has a great human interest angle to it. Like people still speculate about Kit Marlowe's personal life and the circumstances of his mysterious life. He wrote some notable plays as well, but he's as often remembered for his biography as for his art. The fact that he was basically a hellraiser who got into duels and was an alleged spy contributed to his lasting fame. TBF, though most records we have from the 1500s are books, other written documents, paintings or buildings, hence why the most remembered people are people like Shakespeare and monarchs and scientists, as their lives were preserved in writing and artwork and architecture. With 21st century technology, people of the future will be far more likely to remember actors and sports personalities, as their lives will be preserved in records of their work just as celebrities of the 16th century. It's hard to argue that a person like Lionel Messi or Walt Disney will be completely forgotten about in 500 years. While people may not know when people lived, I guarantee there are several people from the 1500s that you and everyone else knows. Some famous monarchs: Mary Queen of Scots, Elizabeth I, Suleiman the Magnificent, Henry VIII, James I, Odin Abunaga, Ivan the Terrible, Charles V. Other famous people: Shakespeare, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Niccolo Machiavelli, Pocahontas, Nostradamus, Guy Fawkes, Francis Bacon, René Descartes, Hernan Cortés, Nicolaus Copernicus, Martin Luther, Christopher Columbus. I think you're selling it a little short, especially if America declines, dissolves in the next century. Love or hate him, Trump is more of a character than all of the other presidents thus far combined. And there's nothing high school history teachers love more than big characters. If America falls, there are also very good cases for putting the blame on Reagan, Nixon, Carter, or really any other president of the last 50 years. But Trump will take the fall because he's the most fun to teach. Also, January 6th is at least a Guy Fawkes level of memorable, and he'll always be tied to that. People will absolutely know the life of Hitler and the actions he took to make his name synonymous with evil. At least the educated people. He might be viewed as the, hopefully, last and culmination of the great historical conquerors like Alexander, Hannibal, Caesar, Genghis, Napoleon, etc. Unless things get really bad for humanity, I will probably be the last total war between leading nation-states, and learning about the deplorable life of Hitler will always be a great lesson for future generations about the horrors of war and unchecked nationalism. Everyone in this thread naming us presidents are hilarious. The US is just under 250 years old and already in decline. There won't be a version of USA in the 2500s that you will be able to consider the same country, not even getting to the fact the world itself will largely be uninhabitable in 70+ years at the current rate we are going with regards to fighting climate change. Temperatures are going to rise, leaving large parts of the planet unable to sustain human life unless insanely drastic changes to the way we all live occur in the next few decades, and we all know that's not happening. No one is going to give a shit about Obama or Trump in 500 years. It's an example of the level of self-importance Americans have that they think their current popular political figures will last centuries. I think Adam Malley's at least among Polish people. Adam Małysz used to be a ski jumper, very popular in Poland in early '80s. He is not a ski jumper anymore. He is alive, but left ski jumping a few years ago and started racing Formula 1. He is not really popular now, and today's kids and teens may not ever know who Adam Małysz is. So why did I choose him? Well, there is the term srak na Malyza, to shit Malyza style, which basically means shitting, probably in a public toilet, with your knees bent but your butt not touching the toilet. The pose that ski jumpers do before they jump. Kids may not know who Malyza is, but srani na Malyza is so deep in our language and culture that I think a part of Adam Malysz will be alive forever. 500 years is a very long time. Initially I was thinking maybe a politician, maybe Trump, maybe Obama, but honestly in 500 years they will barely be a footnote, assuming Trump's aftermath doesn't get too much more crazy. Celebrities, PFFT, please. Really the only people we remember from 500 years ago are a few scientists, discoverers and kings, queens. We don't have kings, queens like we did in the past anymore. None of them are going to go around conquering places, so the people that are left are scientists and discoverers. So I would say the answer would be whoever cures cancer and whoever discovers Mars. Let's see. Brings up Wikipedia article for the year 1521. We have the Pope at the time and his squabbles with Martin Luther, Suleiman the Sultan of the Ottomans, Magellan doing a big explore, Cortes being a bloodthirsty turd in South and Central America, but he brought chocolate to Europe so he wasn't all bad. People active around that time whose names we still know. Leonardo had just died 2 years earlier, and Michelangelo was at the height of his output. Nostradamus was a precocious 18-year-old and hadn't started writing prophecies yet. Columbus was 15 years dead and good riddance. Copernicus was being very smart, and Machiavelli had just written The Prince. So, who are our living equivalents? Art-wise, think of everyone who is going to end up in textbooks, being taught to successive generations of students. Spielberg is a strong candidate, love him or hate him. I think Stephen King will be remembered too. Musically, the living members of the Beatles and the Stones count, as well the biggest film composers like Williams and Zimmer. Do we have any Magellan equivalents? Not yet, but maybe in a few decades when the space program has ramped back up. Luther, can't think of anyone. Religion just isn't the cultural force it was then.